Have you ever wondered why one small comment can steal your peace for an entire day? And have you ever noticed that what hurts you most is not always what happens, but what your mind insists it means? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to walk through 10 Buddhist principles that can help you become the kind of person who stays steady in praise and blame, gain and loss, comfort and discomfort. Not because you become numb, not because you stop caring, but because you awaken to something deeper than your triggers. Two main ideas will guide this whole talk. First, nothing outside you has guaranteed power over your inner world unless your mind hands it the key. Second, the path to being unshakable is not a performance. It is a daily training in awareness, wisdom, karma, compassion, and letting go. Let me tell it as a story of a person who wanted to become untouchable by life and slowly discovered that the real untouchable place is not a shield. It is awareness itself. There was a person who looked calm on the outside but felt constantly stirred on the inside. They were affected by everything. A late reply felt like rejection. A stranger's tone felt like disrespect. A co-worker's success felt like proof they were behind. A family member's criticism felt like a verdict on their worth. Even good things made them anxious because they feared losing them. They tried the usual solutions. They tried controlling their environment. They tried controlling other people. They tried forcing positive thinking. They tried avoiding conflict. They tried pretending they did not care. They tried building a tough image, but nothing worked for long, because the real problem was not the world. The real problem was the mind that kept clinging, resisting, and identifying. One evening, after yet another day of emotional turbulence, the person sat quietly and asked a question that sounded simple but changed everything. Why am I so easy to move? Not physically. Emotionally, why can a few words rearrange my whole nervous system? Why can a memory from years ago still squeeze my chest today? Why can my peace vanish in seconds? In that moment, a deeper question appeared underneath. Who is the one that gets moved? Because if you can notice being moved, then something in you is not moved. Something in you is aware of the movement. That first glimpse did not make them instantly wise, but it gave them a direction, a path. They began to practice, not in a dramatic way, but in small moments. And over time, they discovered 10 principles that acted like 10 doors. Each door opened into more freedom, not freedom from life happening, but freedom from being owned by life. The first principle was the recognition of impermanence. At first, impermanence sounded depressing to them. Everything changes, nothing stays. But as they sat with it, they realized impermanence is not a threat, it is a medicine. Because if everything changes, then no feeling is forever. No shame is forever. No anxiety is forever. No heartbreak is forever. Even the situations you fear will shift, because the nature of reality is movement. They started practicing impermanence in real time. When anger rose, they would say quietly inside, "This too will pass," not as a slogan, but as an observation. They would watch the heat rise in the body, peak, and then soften. If they did not keep feeding it with story, this changed their relationship with emotion. They stopped treating feelings like permanent identity. They stopped saying, "I am an anxious person." They started saying anxiety is visiting. And when something is a visitor, you can host it without handing over your house. The second principle was non-attachment. And this one took time because they misunderstood it at first. They thought non-attachment meant not loving, not wanting, not caring. But what they discovered is that attachment is not love. It is fear plus grabbing. Attachment says, I need this to be okay. Attachment says, if I lose this, I will collapse. Attachment says, you must stay the way I want you to stay. Non-attachment is love without chains. It is caring without clutching. It is commitment without possession. They practice this with small things. They practiced letting someone be in a bad mood without making it personal. They practiced allowing a plan to change without turning it into a crisis. They practiced enjoying a good moment without immediately worrying that it might end. Over time, they felt a strange relief. They could still love deeply, but they suffered less because their love was less mixed with panic. The third principle was the understanding of dukkha, the truth that ordinary life contains stress and dissatisfaction when you cling to it wrongly. This principle did not tell them to be pessimistic. It told them to be honest. They realized that many of their expectations were invisible contracts with reality. Reality must be fair in the exact way I defined fair. People must behave in the exact way I prefer. My mind must be calm on demand. My life must not include discomfort. My past must not have happened. My future must be guaranteed. Every one of these contracts created suffering because reality did not sign them. So the person practiced a new relationship to discomfort. When stress appeared, instead of immediately asking, how do I remove it? They asked, what am I believing right now that is making this heavier than it needs to be? Sometimes they found a demand. Sometimes they found a comparison. Sometimes they found a fear story. Sometimes they found an old wound asking for care. This principle made them less surprised by life, less offended by imperfection, more willing to be human, and that willingness itself reduced suffering. The fourth principle was mindfulness, but not the trendy version. The real one. Mindfulness is the ability to know what is happening as it is happening, not later, not through a story, but directly. They practiced mindfulness in the body because the body does not lie. The mind can invent, exaggerate, and predict. The body tells you what is actually here. When irritation rose, they noticed tightening in the jaw. When fear rose, they noticed sinking in the stomach. When shame rose, they noticed heat in the face. When envy rose, they noticed restlessness in the chest. By noticing early, they could respond earlier. They could pause before words became weapons. They could breathe before habits took over. Mindfulness became a kind of inner light, not a dramatic light, a practical light. It showed them the moment a pattern was beginning. And if you can see a pattern beginning, you can stop feeding it. The fifth principle was right view, meaning seeing cause and effect clearly. This is where karma stopped being a mysterious idea and became a daily reality. They began to watch how thoughts shaped emotions, how emotions shaped words, how words shaped relationships, how relationships shaped their future. They saw how a small lie created tension in the body. They saw how a harsh tone created distance. They saw how a generous act created warmth. They saw how a moment of patience prevented a day of regret. Karma became obvious, not as cosmic punishment, but as momentum. They realized that being unaffected by the world does not mean the world has no impact. It means you stop responding blindly in ways that multiply suffering. When you see cause and effect, you become careful with your inner life. You stop planting thorns and then complaining about bleeding. The sixth principle was compassion. And this one surprised them because they thought compassion was soft. They assumed being unshakable meant being tough, indifferent, and emotionally armored. But their toughness had been a mask, and it made them lonely. Compassion, real compassion, gave them stability without hardness. They learned compassion first toward themselves. When they failed, Instead of attacking themselves, they practiced returning. They practiced beginning again. They realized self-hatred was not discipline, it was violence. And violence inside creates violence outside, even if it is subtle. Then compassion extended outward. They began to recognize that other people are also run by their pain bodies, their fears, their cravings, their confusion. This did not mean they tolerated harm. It meant they stopped adding hatred. They could set boundaries with clarity rather than poison. And something shifted. The world felt less like an enemy. It felt more like a place full of struggling beings, including themselves. Compassion made them less reactive because reaction often comes from the belief that you must defend a fragile self. Compassion strengthens the heart so it does not need to lash out to feel real. The seventh principle was equanimity, the ability to stay balanced in the middle of change. Equanimity is not numbness. It is not suppressing emotion. It is stability in the face of emotion. They practiced equanimity by learning to allow waves without drowning. When sadness rose, they let it be there. They felt it as sensation. They breathed with it. They did not instantly turn it into a story of doom. When anger rose, they felt the heat. They noticed the urge to attack. They did not obey the urge. They waited. Waiting felt like weakness at first. Then it felt like power, because they noticed that many regrets are born in seconds. A single sentence spoken from reactivity can create months of consequences. Equanimity gave them the ability to wait out the storm until wisdom returned. And when wisdom returned, the right action became obvious. The eighth principle was letting go, and this became their daily practice. They discovered that what affects you most is often what you refuse to release. They held on to being right. They held on to old resentment. They held on to the image of how life should have been. They held on to self-criticism as if it were protection. Letting go did not mean forgetting. It meant unclenching. They practiced letting go in small moments. They let go of rereading messages to hunt for hidden meaning. They let go of replaying old conversations like a courtroom trial. They let go of imagining the perfect comeback. They let go of checking for validation. Every time they let go, they felt more energy return, because clinging is exhausting. It is a constant inner grip. Letting go became like setting down a heavy bag you forgot you were carrying. The ninth principle was wise speech and wise action, because being unshakable is not only inner work, it is ethical work. They realized that peace is not only a feeling. Peace is a life built with fewer seeds of regret. So they practiced speaking truthfully, kindly, and at the right time. Not perfectly, but more often. They practiced not gossiping, because gossip is cheap dopamine that creates long karma. It creates distrust, division, and inner restlessness. They practiced not exaggerating, because exaggeration trains the mind to live in distortion. They practiced apologizing quickly when they harmed someone, because pride is heavy. They practiced keeping promises, because integrity makes the mind calm. This ethical practice made them less affected by the world, because so much reactivity comes from guilt, shame, and hidden contradictions. When your life is cleaner, the mind is quieter. The 10th principle was direct recognition of awareness, the core of awakening. All the other principles supported this one, and this one supported all the others. They began to notice that awareness itself isn't touched by whatever appears. Thoughts appear, awareness knows. Feelings appear, awareness knows. Sound appears, awareness knows. Praise appears, awareness knows. Blame appears, awareness knows. The content changes. The knowing does not need to change. So the person practiced turning attention toward the knower. When they were anxious, They asked quietly, "What is aware of anxiety?" When they were angry, they asked, "What is aware of anger?" When they were ashamed, they asked, "What is aware of shame?" At first, this seemed too simple, but then they felt it. The shift from being inside the emotion to being aware of the emotion. This was the secret door to being unshakable, because the world can shake your circumstances. The world can change your plans. The world can hurt your feelings. The world can disappoint you. But the world cannot remove the fact of awareness. And when you rest as awareness, you experience a different kind of strength. A strength that does not depend on controlling life. Now let us return to the story, because after months of training, the person faced a real test. A situation happened that normally would have ruined them emotionally. Someone misunderstood them publicly. Their reputation felt threatened. They felt the old surge, heat in the chest, mind racing, the urge to defend, the urge to attack. But this time, they noticed. They noticed the bodily surge. They noticed the story forming. They felt the temptation to react, and they paused. In that pause, they remembered impermanence. This moment will pass. They remembered non-attachment. I do not need to be seen perfectly to be okay. They remembered dukkha. The mind wants to demand control, but life does not promise that. They remembered mindfulness. Feel the breath. Feel the feet. They remembered karma. If I react harshly, I plant suffering. They remembered compassion. The other person is also confused and conditioned. They remembered equanimity. Stay balanced. They remembered letting go. Drop the need to win this second. They remembered wise speech. Speak only what reduces harm. And they remembered awareness. Be the space that holds the wave. So they responded calmly, not passively, clearly. They corrected what needed correction. They set a boundary. They did not escalate. Later, alone, they noticed something extraordinary. The situation had not been pleasant, but it had not stolen their inner life. They realized that being unaffected does not mean nothing touches you. It means you stop being owned. And the more they practiced, the more stable this became. They began to see how most suffering is a kind of inner volunteering. The world offers an event. Then the mind volunteers to turn it into identity, story, and self-attack. When you stop volunteering, you become free. Now I want to speak directly to you as you listen, because you might be thinking, "This sounds good, but my life is intense. My triggers are strong. My environment is chaotic. My emotions are heavy." Yes, and the path does not ask you to deny that. It asks you to train in the middle of it. Training does not require perfect conditions. Training requires small repeated returns. Return to the body. Return to breath. Return to awareness. Return to compassion. Return to right action. Every return plants a seed. Seeds become momentum. Momentum becomes destiny. That is karma in living form. I have seen people around me become steadier not because their world became easier, but because they learned to stop feeding the inner fire. A person who used to explode in anger learned to notice the first spark and breathe. Their relationships changed. A person who used to spiral in anxiety learned to feel the body and stop believing every thought. Their sleep improved. A person who used to cling to validation learned to work quietly and let results speak. Their confidence became real. A person who carried resentment for years learned to forgive, not to excuse, but to be free. Their health improved. These are not fantasies. They are the fruits of practice. And the most important part is that none of this requires you to become someone else. It requires you to stop being lost inside the mind that tells you who you must be. When awareness leads, you become more yourself, not less. Thank you for being here with me today. If this talk resonated, I want to invite you into a simple experiment. Today, choose one moment when you normally get triggered. A message, a tone, a delay, a criticism, a memory. When it happens, pause for one breath. Feel the body. Notice the story. Ask, what is aware of this? That one breath is the beginning of being unshakable. Now I want to hear from you. What is the one thing that affects you most right now? And which of these principles do you feel you need the most in this season of your life? Leave a comment, share your story, and support the channel by subscribing, liking, and commenting so more people can find this path of wisdom and compassion. Until next time, keep practicing, keep softening, and keep trusting the awareness that remains steady through every storm.